car dealership manager kicks out black man, unaware he is the new owner. The dealership floor gleamed under the showroom lights, each luxury vehicle positioned like a piece of fine art. Sleek sedans and polished SUVs reflected the world outside, where the sun glowed against the towering glass windows. It was a place meant to impress, a place where the elite came to spend small fortunes on status symbols. And it was a place where David Sterling felt untouchable. Dressed in an expensive navy suit, David stood near the front desk, his sharp blue eyes scanning the floor like a king surveying his kingdom. At 45, he had built his career on smooth talk and intimidation. To him, success meant keeping people in their place. His staff respected him, or feared him, but either way they obeyed. That was all that mattered. Then he saw him. A tall black man, dressed in an immaculately tailored gray suit, stepped through the glass doors. He moved with an effortless confidence, his gaze sweeping across the showroom as if he were studying something. But David didn't care about his posture or the elegance of his attire. He saw a problem. David had seen this before. Black men coming in just to take photos with cars they couldn't afford, to touch things they had no business touching. He wasn't about to let another one waste his time. His dealership catered to serious buyers, and this man? He didn't belong here. "Can I help you?" David asked, already stepping toward him, his voice carrying an edge. The man turned slightly, offering a small smile. "Just browsing." David barely contained his irritation. "This isn't a museum." He motioned toward the exit with a subtle jerk of his head. "We don't entertain casual visitors." A hush fell over the nearby staff. Samantha, a junior saleswoman, stiffened behind the reception desk, her fingers gripping the keyboard a little tighter. She had seen David pull this move before, dismissing people he deemed unworthy. But something about this particular man unsettled her. There was no hesitation in his expression, no embarrassment, no anger. Just amusement. "Browsing isn't allowed?" The man's voice was smooth, unbothered. David folded his arms. "Not for people who waste my time." The words landed like a slap, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, his smile deepened, as if he were enjoying something David couldn't understand. He took a slow step forward, his eyes moving from car to car before returning to David's face. "You must be the manager," he said. David straightened, his pride swelling. "That's right." The man nodded thoughtfully, as if committing that fact to memory. Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. His departure was calm, unhurried, like a man who had already won a game no one else knew they were playing. David watched him go, a flicker of doubt creeping into his mind. There was something off about the way the man left. No protest, no argument, no attempt to prove himself. Just amusement, like he knew something David didn't. He shook off the feeling and turned to his employees. "Next time, don't waste time letting people like that in," he snapped before walking toward his office. Behind him, Samantha exhaled, her eyes lingering on the glass doors. Something told her David had just made a very, very big mistake. The downtown skyline stretched beyond the glass walls of the high-rise conference room, a sea of towering structures gleaming under the afternoon sun. Inside, the air carried the weight of an impending shift, one that only a handful of men in the room understood. Marcus Cole sat at the head of a long, polished table, his fingers tapping idly against its surface as legal documents were passed around. His expression remained calm, unreadable, but beneath the surface, there was a quiet satisfaction growing. Across from him, Richard Langley, the senior executive of the dealership's parent company, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Everything is in place, Marcus. As of this afternoon, you are the majority shareholder. Congratulations." A round of polite applause followed from the lawyers and board members seated along the table. Marcus accepted their nods, but remained focused on the papers before him. He skimmed the final contract, though he already knew every word. With a single stroke of his pen, he now controlled the very company that employed David Sterling. Marcus leaned back, exhaling slowly as he placed the pen down. "I assume the employees aren't aware of this yet." Langley shook his head. "No, we haven't announced anything. We were planning an internal briefing next week, but if you'd prefer to." "Not necessary." Marcus cut in, his voice smooth, controlled. "I'd like to make my introduction in person." A few heads turned at that. Most new owners preferred to operate from the shadows, making changes through corporate memos and restructuring plans. But Marcus had no intention of being just a name on an email. He wanted to see the reactions firsthand. Langley hesitated. "Are you sure that's the best approach? These transitions can be delicate." Marcus gave him a knowing look. "I'm counting on that." The meeting concluded shortly after, and as Marcus stepped out into the private elevator, he allowed himself a small smile. The pieces were already in motion. The same man who had dismissed him from his own dealership was still working under the illusion that he held any real power. That illusion wouldn't last much longer. As the elevator descended, Marcus reflected on the years that had led him here. He had built his fortune through real estate and strategic investments, carefully expanding his reach into industries that mattered. The auto industry had been a new challenge, but when the opportunity arose to acquire a major stake in Sterling Automotive Group, he hadn't hesitated. David Sterling, of course, had no idea that his last name no longer held the weight it once did. When the elevator doors slid open, James Holloway, Marcus's longtime friend and business partner, was waiting in the lobby. Dressed in a charcoal suit, James had the easy confidence of a man who had seen both success and struggle. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" James said, falling into step beside him. Marcus chuckled. "More than I should." James shook his head, grinning. "Man, I still can't believe that idiot kicked you out of your own dealership." "Oh, I can." Marcus's expression darkened slightly. "Men like him think they own the world, that everyone has to fit into the little boxes they create." He exhaled sharply. "They forget that the world changes." James nodded. "So, when are you making your grand entrance?" "Tomorrow morning." James raised an eyebrow. "That soon?" Marcus smirked. "Why waste time?" James chuckled. "Fair enough. Just promise me one thing." Marcus glanced at him. "Make it unforgettable." Marcus's smile widened. "Oh, don't worry. I intend to." The hum of conversation filled the dealership's break room as employees gathered in small clusters, sipping coffee and scrolling through their phones. The usual routine of the morning had been disrupted by an unexpected memo. Mandatory staff meeting, 10 a.m. sharp. No reason was given, no details, just a firm instruction that everyone was to be present. Whispers swirled through the room. The dealership rarely held mandatory meetings unless it was something big. Samantha, the junior saleswoman, sat at a table near the window, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly as she listened to the chatter around her. "You think we're getting a new sales director?" one of the finance guys asked, leaning against the counter. "Nah, that wouldn't require a full staff meeting," another chimed in. "Maybe a new regional manager?" Samantha remained quiet, though her mind was far from calm. She had a feeling she already knew what this was about. Ever since the previous afternoon, something had been nagging at her. The way that black man, Marcus, had carried himself, the way he had smirked when David dismissed him, it had felt deliberate. As if he wasn't actually walking away defeated, but walking away with a secret. And now, less than 24 hours later, there was an emergency meeting. Her gut told her this wasn't a coincidence. Across the break room, David Sterling stood near the door, sipping his espresso with a look of quiet satisfaction. Unlike his employees, he wasn't worried. In his mind, whatever this meeting was about, it certainly wasn't about him. If anything, David assumed it was about the dealership's numbers, maybe a new strategy from corporate. He was already prepared to take credit for anything positive and shift blame for anything negative. That was how he had survived in this business for so long. His gaze flicked toward Samantha, noticing her pensive expression. He smirked. "You look nervous, Sam. Afraid they're cutting your commission?" She glanced at him, but instead of her usual polite response, she just studied him for a moment. "Not nervous," she said finally. "Just curious." David shrugged, taking another sip. "Relax. Whatever it is, it doesn't concern us." At exactly 10 a.m., the showroom doors swung open, and the dealership's corporate liaison, Mark Phillips, stepped inside. Behind him, Marcus Cole walked in, his presence commanding but effortless. Samantha's breath caught. David's espresso paused halfway to his lips. The room fell silent. Marcus was back. But this time, he wasn't just another customer. David's confusion twisted into annoyance. He recognized Marcus immediately, and a flicker of frustration sparked in his chest. What was he doing here? Mark Phillips cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for gathering on such short notice. We have a significant announcement regarding the future of this dealership." He glanced toward Marcus before continuing. "As of yesterday afternoon, there has been a change in ownership. Sterling Automotive Group has undergone a major acquisition, and as a result, we are pleased to introduce you to your new owner, Mr. Marcus Cole." Dead silence. The words didn't register at first. "New owner?" Marcus stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room with quiet amusement. "It's good to see all of you," he said smoothly. I look forward to working together and making some much-needed improvements around here. David's mind short-circuited. New owner? This man? The same man he had publicly humiliated yesterday. His grip on his coffee cup tightened, his face draining of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Marcus turned toward him with a slow, deliberate smile. David, he said casually. Nice to see you again. The weight of the moment crushed David's chest. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But the look in Marcus's eyes told him otherwise. The game had changed. And David? He was no longer the one in control. David Sterling had spent his entire career commanding respect, but as he stood in front of his employees, facing Marcus Cole, he felt something foreign creeping into his chest, fear. It didn't make sense. He was the manager of this dealership. He had built its success. His numbers were among the best in the region. There was no way some outsider could just waltz in and take everything from him. Yet, the truth was staring him in the face. Marcus owned the dealership now. The break room, once buzzing with speculation, had fallen into absolute silence. Every eye flicked between Marcus and David, waiting, watching. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak. David swallowed hard, forcing himself to regain his composure. He straightened his shoulders and let out a stiff chuckle. Well, he said, forcing a smile, I have to say, this is quite the surprise. Marcus gave him a slow, knowing nod. I imagine it is. David let out another strained laugh, though his fingers twitched at his sides. I just wish I had known sooner. I would have prepared a proper welcome. Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply studied David, as if peeling back his carefully constructed facade, layer by layer. Then, with a slight tilt of his head, he said, You had your chance to welcome me yesterday. The words hung in the air like a heavy stone dropped into still water. A few employees exchanged glances, realization dawning on their faces. Samantha, standing near the front, felt her stomach twist. David's smirk faltered. I didn't realize. You didn't bother to ask, Marcus interrupted smoothly. His voice was calm, controlled. He wasn't angry, he didn't need to be. The weight of his position alone was enough. David's mind raced. He needed to turn this around fast. Listen, he said, his tone shifting into something almost rehearsed. If there was a misunderstanding, I truly apologize. I was only trying to protect the integrity of the dealership. We get, well, a lot of people who come in just to look around. Marcus raised an eyebrow. A lot of black men? The room tensed. David's breath caught in his throat. He felt the stares, the judgment, the silent accusations pressing against his skin. He had always been careful, never outright saying anything offensive, just implying, just maneuvering. But now there was no escape. Of course not, he stammered. I treat all customers the same. A slow, knowing smile spread across Marcus's face. Do you? David couldn't answer. Marcus turned away, addressing the employees instead. Let's get one thing clear, he said, his voice filling the room. I'm not here to disrupt your lives. I don't believe in making changes just for the sake of it, but I do believe in fairness, respect, and above all, competence. He let the last word linger. Everyone knew what it meant. David clenched his jaw. His grip tightened on his coffee cup, his knuckles turning white. Marcus turned back to him. David, I think you and I need to have a private conversation. David hesitated, but he had no choice. Not in front of everyone. He forced himself to nod. Of course. Marcus gestured toward the hallway leading to the offices. After you. David walked stiffly, his entire world unraveling with every step. Marcus followed behind him, his presence undeniable. As the office door closed behind them, David knew one thing for certain. This was the beginning of the end. David stepped into his office, feeling the weight of Marcus's presence behind him. The space, once his personal kingdom, now felt small, suffocating. The neatly arranged plaques and framed certificates on the wall did nothing to steady his nerves. Marcus closed the door with a deliberate slowness, taking his time as he scanned the room. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his stance, a quiet authority that made it clear he was in control. David moved behind his desk, as if putting that piece of furniture between them would somehow protect him. He forced a tight smile, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please have a seat. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he leaned against the door, arms crossed. I'll stand. David swallowed. All right. Well, I assume you wanted to talk about my role here. Marcus let out a soft chuckle. Your role? He shook his head slightly, pushing off the door. David, I don't think you understand what's happening here. David straightened, gripping the edge of his desk. "I've been running this dealership for years," he said, trying to sound confident. "Under my leadership, we've had record-breaking sales numbers. I know this business better than anyone. You'd be making a mistake to keep you." Marcus interrupted smoothly. David's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Marcus took a slow step forward. "You think I came here to ask for your cooperation?" Another step. "You think I came to negotiate?" David forced a chuckle, but it came out strained. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. If I had known who you were." Marcus's eyes darkened. "That's exactly the problem, isn't it?" David's fingers twitched against the desk. Marcus took another step, stopping just in front of the chair David had offered. "You didn't care to know who I was. You assumed. You judged. And you dismissed me without a second thought." He tilted his head slightly. "Tell me, David, how many other customers have you treated the same way?" David shook his head quickly. "That's not fair. I was just enforcing company policy." Marcus let out a slow breath, as if amused by the lie. "Let's drop the act. We both know you don't belong here." David's jaw clenched. "You can't just walk in here and I can do whatever I want." Marcus's voice was calm, controlled, but there was an undeniable finality to it. David felt his stomach drop. Marcus picked up a small paperweight from the desk, rolling it between his fingers as he spoke. "I've been watching this dealership for a while now. You run it like a kingdom, David. Favoritism, discrimination, backroom deals." He placed the paperweight back down carefully. "I don't run my businesses that way." David forced himself to sit, gripping the arms of his chair. He had to salvage this somehow. "Look, I've built relationships with the clients here. I know what works, what doesn't. If you let me stay on, I can help you transition." Marcus laughed softly, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you?" He leaned forward, planting his hands on the desk. His voice dropped just enough to send a chill through David's spine. "You're fired." David's entire body tensed. The words crashed down on him, shattering whatever illusion of control he had left. He shot to his feet. "You can't." "I already did." David's chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. His mind raced, trying to find a way out, an argument, anything. Marcus straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. "Security will escort you out. I suggest you take whatever dignity you have left and leave quietly." David's face twisted in rage. "I made this dealership what it is." His voice rose, desperate. "These people respect me." Marcus's lips curled slightly. "Let's find out." He turned, walking to the door. Before David could respond, Marcus pulled it open, stepping back into the showroom where the employees still lingered, waiting. All eyes turned toward them. David's heart pounded as he stepped forward, trying to keep his expression neutral. But the look on Marcus's face told everyone exactly what had just happened. A heavy silence followed. Then, from somewhere in the back, Samantha exhaled softly. And just like that, the illusion of David Sterling's power shattered. David's world collapsed in slow motion. The eyes of every employee bore into him, their expressions ranging from quiet shock to thinly veiled satisfaction. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. They weren't surprised. For years, he had ruled this dealership with an iron grip, keeping his favorites close and shutting out those he deemed unworthy. Now, as he stood there, stripped of his authority, he saw it clearly. They had been waiting for this moment. He clenched his jaw, forcing his expression into something controlled, but his hands trembled at his sides. "This is a mistake," he muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. Marcus, standing with effortless confidence, let the silence stretch before finally speaking. "You're still here?" A few employees shifted uncomfortably, their gazes flicking between the two men. Samantha, standing near the front, bit her lip. She had been the target of David's favoritism once, but now she only felt a cold detachment toward him. David's pride warred with his survival instinct. His first impulse was to lash out, to demand they reconsider, to remind them of the numbers he had brought in, the clients who trusted him. But something in Marcus's stance told him it would be useless. The decision had already been made. Still, he couldn't just walk away. Not like this. Straightening his shoulders, he forced a tight smile. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "If that's how you want to do this, fine. But don't think this place will run itself. You'll see soon enough how much you needed me." Marcus didn't react. He simply stepped aside and gestured toward the exit. "I'll take my chances." David hesitated for half a second, then turned sharply on his heel. His shoes clicked against the showroom floor as he strode toward his office to gather his things, but the weight of their stares followed him. As soon as the door shut behind him, the tension in the room shifted. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter. A few employees exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. Some, like Jake, who had been passed over for promotions multiple times despite his hard work, let out a slow breath of relief. Others, still caught in the shock of it all, remained silent. Marcus let them process it. He had no intention of rushing this moment. Then, after a long pause, he turned toward them and spoke. If anyone has concerns about what happens next, my door is open. There was something about the way he said it, calm, steady, confident. It wasn't a plea for trust. It was a statement. A promise. Samantha stepped forward. Does this mean things are going to change? Marcus met her gaze. Yes. For the first time in years, she smiled. David stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him so hard that the glass in the frame rattled. His breathing was heavy, his fingers curling into tight fists as he tried to steady himself. The walls of this office, the desk he had ruled from, the chair he had leaned back in while making decisions that shaped the dealership, all of it was about to be taken from him. He snatched a box from the corner of the room and started shoving his belongings into it. His framed awards, his favorite pen set, the leather-bound planner he had used religiously. His hands trembled as he ripped his nameplate off the desk and threw it into the box. This wasn't happening. The door creaked open slightly, and David's head snapped up. Samantha stood there, hesitating for just a moment before stepping inside. What do you want? David snapped, his voice sharp. She looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. I just wanted to see if you were okay. David let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Oh, spare me the sympathy, Samantha. We both know you're probably thrilled about this. She didn't deny it. You treated a lot of people unfairly, David. You had to know this would catch up with you eventually. David clenched his jaw. You think you're better than me? You played along when it suited you. Samantha exhaled, her eyes flicking to the chaos on his desk. You were in charge. People had to play along to survive. That doesn't mean they liked it. David turned away, gripping the edge of the desk as frustration burned inside him. Marcus doesn't know what he's doing. He's going to run this place into the ground. Samantha tilted her head. Or maybe he's going to fix what you broke. David's nostrils flared. He wanted to argue, but deep down he knew there was nothing left to say. The dealership had already moved on without him. David sat in his now nearly empty office, staring at the wall. His nameplate lay discarded in the box beside him, a cruel reminder of how fast everything had unraveled. He had built his identity around his position here, but in the span of a few minutes, it had been taken away. He had always believed himself untouchable, a king in his own little kingdom. But kings fell, and today he had been dethroned. The door opened again, this time with more force. Jake, one of the salesmen he had often overlooked, stepped inside. His expression was neutral, but there was a sharpness in his gaze that David didn't like. You need something? David asked, his voice low and tired. Jake folded his arms. Just wanted to see it with my own eyes. David scoffed. See what? Jake smirked. You. Packing. Leaving. He let the words settle before adding, never thought I'd live to see the day. David's hands clenched into fists. Watch yourself, Jake. Jake chuckled. Or what? You don't have any power here anymore. David wanted to fire back, to remind Jake that he had once controlled his paycheck, his promotions, his future. But now those words rang hollow. Jake glanced around the office before shaking his head. You really thought you were invincible, didn't you? David didn't respond. He couldn't. Jake took a step forward. You remember last year when I put in for that senior sales position? David looked away. You told me I wasn't management material, Jake continued, his voice even but laced with resentment. And then you gave the job to Brad. The guy who barely made half my numbers but happened to golf with you on weekends. David swallowed hard. He had done that. And it wasn't the only time. Jake exhaled, shaking his head. I don't expect an apology. You wouldn't mean it anyway. But I hope you sit with this for a while, David. I hope you finally understand what it feels like to be dismissed, to be treated like you're less than. David forced himself to meet Jake's gaze. Enjoy your moment, he muttered. It won't last. Jake gave him a slow smile. We'll see. With that, he turned and walked out, leaving David alone in the silence of his downfall. David sat in his empty office, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The once familiar space now felt foreign, stripped of its authority and power. The framed certificates, the sleek glass awards, everything that had once marked his dominance were gone. All that remained were bitter memories and the suffocating reality of his fall. He glanced at the clock. Each second that ticked by was another moment closer to his forced departure. The dealership floor buzzed with an energy that seemed different, lighter. Employees moved with a sense of freedom that he had never allowed. For the first time in years, he wasn't the center of attention. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped inside. Unlike the others, his face held no smugness, no lingering satisfaction, just the same calm confidence he had shown when he revealed his ownership. "It's time," Marcus said simply. David let out a slow breath, standing up with the last shred of dignity he had left. "You think you're ready for this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Marcus didn't flinch. "I know I am." David let out a dry chuckle. "This place will eat you alive. Customers aren't your friends. Employees will turn on you the moment they think they can get something better. You'll see." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "Or maybe I'll run this place the right way. The way it should have been run all along." David picked up his box, his grip tightening around the edges. "We'll see how long that lasts." As he stepped out of the office, every pair of eyes turned toward him. Some employees avoided his gaze, while others didn't bother hiding their satisfaction. He could feel their judgment, their quiet celebrations. The king had fallen, and there was no one left to catch him. David stepped out of his office for the last time, his grip tight around the box of his belongings. The showroom, once his domain, now felt like hostile territory. Employees who once scrambled to impress him barely looked in his direction. Some whispered among themselves, others simply went about their business, as if his downfall was just another part of the day. His chest tightened with anger, but more than that, humiliation. As he walked toward the exit, he spotted Samantha at the front desk. She was talking to a customer, a polite smile on her face, but when her eyes met his, she didn't look away. There was no smugness in her expression, only finality. She had once been one of his favorites, someone he had given opportunities to, yet she wasn't defending him. None of them were. He set his jaw and kept walking. Near the showroom entrance, Jake leaned against a desk, arms crossed. The same man he had overlooked time and time again now looked at him like an equal, or maybe even something less. "You leaving already?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. "Thought you'd put up more of a fight." David forced a smirk, trying to mask the bitterness inside him. "Don't get too comfortable, Jake. This place chews people up and spits them out. You're just another cog in the machine." Jake shrugged. "Maybe, but at least I won't run it like you did." David didn't bother responding. He wasn't about to waste his last moments here arguing with someone beneath him. As he reached the glass doors, he caught one last glimpse of the dealership, the empire he had built and ruled over for years. It was no longer his. With a deep breath, he stepped outside. The air was crisp, the sky a dull gray, mirroring the storm brewing inside him. His car, a sleek black sedan, one of the dealership's finest, sat in the executive parking space, right where he had always left it. But the moment he approached, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. A tow truck was parked right next to it. A man in a company uniform stood beside the vehicle, clipboard in hand, waiting. David frowned. "What the hell is this?" The man barely looked up. "David Carter?" David's pulse quickened. "Yeah." The man clicked his pen. "This vehicle was leased under the company's executive plan. Since you're no longer employed here, it's being repossessed." David felt like he had been punched in the gut. His grip tightened around the box in his hands. "Are you kidding me? I've been driving this car for years." The man didn't flinch. "And now you're not." David turned back toward the dealership, eyes blazing. Through the glass, he saw Marcus standing inside, watching. The smug bastard had planned this. Grinding his teeth, David reached into his pocket for his keys, only to realize he didn't even have them. Company policy required employees to leave their key fobs at the front desk when clocking out. He had done it so many times without thinking, but this time, it meant the car wasn't his to take. He was stranded. His blood boiled as the reality of it sank in. No job. No car. And judging by the way Marcus was looking at him, no severance package either. Marcus had made sure of it. David Carter had spent years making people feel small, reminding them of their place. Now, he was the one being put in his. David stood frozen as the tow truck driver climbed into the cab, started the engine, and slowly began lifting the sleek black sedan off the pavement. The loud clank of metal chains echoed in his ears, a cruel reminder that everything he had built, everything he had flaunted, was gone. His hands clenched into fists. The car had been a symbol of his status, his power. He had parked it in the executive spot every morning with pride, knowing employees would walk past it, knowing they envied him. Now it was being taken from him in full view of the very people he used to command. Marcus had planned this. The timing, the spectacle of it, it wasn't just about taking his position. It was about humiliation. David's breath came sharp and uneven. His suit, once perfectly tailored and pressed, suddenly felt suffocating. The expensive watch on his wrist, the Italian leather shoes, none of it meant anything anymore. He turned back toward the dealership, scanning the glass windows. Inside, employees whispered to each other. Some watched with satisfaction, others with indifference. Not a single face showed concern. No one cared. Samantha stood near the front desk, her arms crossed, watching with an unreadable expression. Jake leaned against the sales counter, shaking his head with an amused smirk. Even the new hires, people who barely knew him, seemed to understand that this moment was justice. David had spent years belittling, manipulating, controlling. Now, it was his turn to be powerless. He took a shaky breath and forced himself to move. His feet carried him across the parking lot, though he had no idea where he was going. His car was gone. His job was gone. He had no driver waiting, no assistant scrambling to fix things. He was alone. The wind cut through his suit as he reached the sidewalk. For the first time in years, he was just another man standing outside a business, an outsider looking in. He reached into his pocket for his phone, but the moment he unlocked it, another gut punch hit. An email. Termination of benefits, effective immediately. The company credit card canceled. The severance package revoked. His healthcare, his executive perks, even his access to the dealership's network, gone. Marcus had thoroughly erased him. David's throat tightened as he read the final line. Any outstanding balances related to company expenses will be deducted from final payroll processing. A bitter laugh escaped him. They were even charging him on the way out. His fingers curled around the phone, resisting the urge to throw it. He had spent so long looking down on people who lost their jobs, assuming they had done something to deserve it. Now he was one of them. He swallowed his pride and scrolled through his contacts. There had to be someone, an old business partner, a client, someone who owed him a favor. But as he scrolled past name after name, a realization hit him like a freight train. He had no real allies. He had built his career on power, not loyalty. Every connection he had was transactional. He knew without even calling, no one would help him. His vision blurred for a moment, the weight of his downfall pressing hard against his chest. He had always thought he was untouchable, that no matter what happened, he would always land on his feet. But now, standing on a cold sidewalk with nowhere to go, he had never felt smaller. His gaze flicked back to the dealership. Marcus was still inside, already settling into the office that once belonged to him. Employees who had feared him now walked freely, as if a weight had been lifted. He had been the problem, and now the problem was gone. David took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and forced himself to walk. He didn't know where he was going, but for the first time in his life, he had no choice but to figure it out.